Welcome. Tonight, we journey to a mountain, not just of rock and dust, but of decision. A place where silence had lingered too long. Where people torn between gods needed to choose. And where one man, standing completely alone, dared to call down fire from heaven. This is the story of Elijah and the fire from heaven, from 1 Kings 18. But it's more than a dramatic tale. It's a reminder for all of us who have ever felt outnumbered, who have stood on shaky ground, wondering if God still sees, still speaks, and still answers. So breathe deeply now. Let go of the noise, the doubt, the day's wait. You're about to step onto Mount Carmel, where fire meets faith. It hadn't rained in Israel for over 3 years. Not a drop. The skies had closed like iron. The land cracked beneath the sun. Crops withered. Streams dried. Hunger grew. And so did fear. This was not random. This was not nature's mistake. This was judgment. A divine drought, spoken by a prophet named Elijah, sent by God. And the reason? Israel had turned away. Turned from the living God who had brought them out of Egypt. Turned toward the false god Baal, a storm god, ironically, believed to control the rain. They built altars to him. Offered sacrifices. Even allowed Queen Jezebel to hunt down and kill the prophets of the Lord. The land was dry, but so were the hearts of the people. And into that dryness, Elijah walked. God had hidden Elijah during the drought. He lived by a brook, fed by ravens. He stayed with a widow, where oil and flour never ran out. And now, God told him, it was time to go back. Go and present yourself to Ahab, the Lord said. And I will send rain on the land. So Elijah set out. Dust clung to his robe. The sun bore down on his shoulders. And in the distance, behind palace walls, sat King Ahab, a man who blamed Elijah for the drought but never looked in the mirror. When Elijah finally appeared before the king, Ahab's voice dripped with accusation. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" But Elijah didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He didn't run. "I have not made trouble for Israel," he said. "But you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." There it was, truth, clear and sharp as lightning. Ahab was king. But Elijah carried the authority of heaven. And then Elijah gave a challenge. "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel," he said. "And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." A duel was coming. Not with swords, but with altars. Word spread quickly. From cities, villages, and wilderness paths, the people came. Men and women. Young and old. Some curious. Some skeptical. Many afraid. They gathered at Mount Carmel, where the sea wind met the high places of the land. Where altars stood. Where the false gods had been honored. And where truth was about to be revealed. Elijah stood alone. Just one man. And across from him, 450 prophets of Baal. Roaring in their numbers. Dripping with ritual and pride. The sun hung high in the sky. The people watched. And the air grew still. Then Elijah spoke, not to the king, not to Baal's prophets, but to the people. "How long will you waver between two opinions?" he said. "If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." Silence. No one answered. No one moved. They had wavered for too long. Now they would watch. The people stood in hushed tension. Elijah raised his voice again, calm, clear, unwavering. "Here is what we will do," he said. "We will each prepare a sacrifice, one bull for Baal's prophets, one for me. We will lay the wood. We will place the offering. But we will not light the fire. Instead, we will each call upon our God, the God who answers by fire. He is God." A murmur passed through the crowd. Then nods. Agreement. The proposal was fair. Undeniable. A final decision was coming, not through debate, but through divine response. "What you say is good," the people said. And so it began. Elijah, calm and confident, let the others go first. The prophets of Baal chose their bull. They prepared the altar. They cut the sacrifice and laid it on the wood. And then they began to call on Baal. From morning until noon, their voices echoed across the mountain. "Baal, answer us," they cried. Over and over. Louder and louder. But there was no voice. No answer. No fire. The people shifted uncomfortably. Sweat trickled down their backs. Still, nothing. Then they danced. Leapt around the altar. Their chants turned frantic. Their rhythm, feverish. Still, no answer came. No smoke. No spark. Nothing but silence. At noon, Elijah stepped forward slightly. He tilted his head. Then, with a voice that carried both mockery and challenge, he spoke. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." The word stung. But the prophets, in their desperation, only grew more intense. They shouted louder. They slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, blood flowing in an attempt to stir the silence. Midday passed. Evening approached. And still, there was no response. No voice. No fire. No God. Only exhaustion. Only emptiness. Only shame. Then Elijah moved. "Steady." "Sure." He raised his hand and called out to the people. "Come here to me." They came. Every eye turned to him. Every heart leaned forward. Before him stood the remains of an old altar of the Lord, broken down, forgotten. And Elijah began to rebuild it. Stone by stone. He took 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, a reminder of their identity, their covenant, their story. He laid the stones with care, built the altar, arranged the wood, placed the sacrifice. And then, he did something unexpected. He dug a trench around the altar, deep enough to hold water. The altar was ready. Stone, wood, and sacrifice, all in place. But Elijah wasn't finished. He turned to the people again. "Fill 4 large jars with water," he said, "and pour it on the offering and on the wood." Water? On an altar meant to be lit? The people blinked, confused. But they obeyed. 4 large jars. Water sloshed down the wood, soaking the sacrifice. Spilled over the stones. Dripped into the trench. But Elijah wasn't done. "Do it again," he said. More water. The wood now sodden. The fire, it seemed, even less likely. "Do it a 3rd time," he said. And they did. 12 jars in total. The trench around the altar filled. The entire structure drenched. It was absurd. It was bold. It was faith. Evening had come. The sun lowered. Shadows stretched across the land. The prophets of Baal were slumped in exhaustion. The people, hushed. The sky, silent. Then Elijah stepped forward. No theatrics. No shouting. Just a prayer. Calm. Steady. Sincere. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel," he said. "Let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." That was all. No frenzy. No drama. Just a man and his God. And then, it happened. Fire fell from heaven. Not lightning. Not a flicker. But fire. Holy. Sudden. Powerful. It consumed the sacrifice. The wood. The stones. The water. Even the dust. In a flash, the impossible was done. The soaked altar became flame. The drenched trench became ash. What no man could ignite, God answered in full. The people fell face down. Overwhelmed. Awestruck. "The Lord, He is God," they cried. "The Lord, He is God." The decision was made. No more wavering. No more silence. The fire had answered. And there was no doubt. Then Elijah gave a final command. "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone escape." And the people obeyed. The false prophets, who had deceived, manipulated, and led the people into idolatry, were removed from the land. It was a hard moment, but a necessary one. The stage was now clear. The people's hearts turned back. The drought had done its work. The fire had confirmed it. The fire had fallen. The false prophet silenced. The people bowed in repentance and awe. But there was still one thing missing. The skies, though fiery moments ago, were still dry. 3.5 years had passed with no rain. And now, with hearts turned and altars restored, it was time for the heavens to open again. Elijah turned to King Ahab, whose face surely paled from all he'd witnessed. "Go, eat and drink," Elijah said, "for there is the sound of a heavy rain." But the sky? Still blue. Still barren. Elijah wasn't relying on clouds. He was relying on God's promise. Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel once again. He bent down on the ground, put his face between his knees, and he began to pray. Not for fire this time, but for rain. The drought had done its work. The people had repented. The sacrifice had been consumed. Now Elijah called upon the Lord for the final act of restoration, water for the land. He sent his servant to look toward the sea. The young man climbed and looked, then returned. "There is nothing there," he said. Elijah didn't stop. He prayed again, then again, and again. 7 times in total. Each time, the servant returned with the same report, nothing. Until the 7th time. The servant came back with a different look in his eyes. "A cloud," he said, "as small as a man's hand, rising from the sea." That was enough. A single cloud. Small, distant, fragile. But it was the beginning. Elijah stood, straightened his robe, and turned toward Ahab's camp. "Go," he told Ahab. "Hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." The king obeyed. And in a moment, the wind shifted. The sky darkened. Clouds gathered with speed. Thunder echoed across the plain. And the rain came. Heavy. Cold. Pouring. The land drank deeply. The drought broke. God's mercy fell like sheets from heaven. But Elijah? He wasn't finished yet. As Ahab raced ahead in his chariot toward Jezreel, Elijah, fueled not by pride or fear, but by the Spirit of the Lord, ran. He gathered his cloak, tied it at his waist, and ran. Faster than the horses, faster than the wheels. Elijah ran through the storm, soaked, barefoot, full of purpose. It was a strange moment. A man who had just called fire from the sky, who had called rain back to the land, now running like a servant in front of a king who barely respected him. But Elijah wasn't running for a hap. He was running because he was still on mission. Because God was not done. The storm raged. But within Elijah, a deeper stillness remained. He had seen God move. He had seen a nation's heart begin to soften. He had seen the power of heaven descend not through spectacle alone, but through faith. But even after such a mighty moment, Elijah knew something that we often forget. Fire doesn't fix everything. Tomorrow would bring new trials. Queen Jezebel would rise in fury. Discouragement would creep into Elijah's heart like a chill after rain. But tonight was about the fire. About the choice. About the voice that did answer. And so, soaked by rain but strengthened by purpose, Elijah ran ahead. Through mud and water. Through wind and thunder. Not because he had something to prove, but because he had a God who had already proven enough. Mount Carmel will always be remembered not for its geography, but for its moment. A moment when silence broke. When false gods fell. When a single man stood and did not waver. And above all, it was the place where God answered. Not with whispers. Not with riddles. But with fire. A fire that did what no human could. That reminded a lost people that the Lord, He is God. And maybe you, listening now, have stood in places like that. Maybe you've looked around and felt outnumbered. Maybe you've watched the world cry out to lifeless things, while your quiet trust in God felt invisible. But friend, God sees. God still hears. And yes, God still answers. So, as we close this story tonight, I hope you carry one thing above all. You do not need to be loud to be faithful. You do not need to be many to be powerful. One voice surrendered to God can change a nation's course. Elijah didn't win with numbers. He didn't win with strength. He stood, spoke, trusted, and left the rest to God. So wherever you are tonight, whatever dry place you stand in, whatever silence you've heard, may this story remind you. God still sends rain after drought. He still brings fire when we least expect it. He still meets the hearts of those who call on Him. And He hasn't forgotten you. Sleep in that peace. Rest in that fire. And wake tomorrow with courage. Because your Mount Carmel moment may be closer than you think.